Listen to me carefully. Behavior follows state. Regulate your nervous system first. This principle is foundational in understanding how to make lasting behavioral change. The state of your nervous system dictates the kinds of behaviors you're capable of accessing at any given moment. When your nervous system is dysregulated, meaning you're in a fight, flight, or freeze mode, the behaviors you tend to default to are reactive, defensive, and often misaligned with your long-term goals. On the other hand, when your system is in a calm, alert, and regulated state, you gain access to higher-order thinking, better emotional regulation, and more intentional action. The nervous system becomes the gatekeeper to behavior, and regulating it is the first step to gaining control over your actions. The autonomic nervous system is made up of two primary branches, the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. This sympathetic system is responsible for activating your body under stress or perceived threat. It increases heart rate, dilates pupils, and prepares you to act quickly. This is useful in acute danger, but when this system is chronically activated, as it often is in modern life, it interferes with your ability to make thoughtful decisions. The parasympathetic system, by contrast, is associated with rest, recovery, and social engagement. When this system is dominant, your heart rate slows, your breathing deepens, and your mind becomes more open to flexible thinking. These are the ideal conditions for learning new behaviors and integrating change. State regulation begins with awareness. You can't shift your nervous system if you don't recognize the state you're in. Signs of dysregulation might include shallow breathing, clenched jaw, racing thoughts, agitation, or mental fog. When you detect these cues early, you gain a window of opportunity to intervene. That's where tools for downshifting the nervous system become essential. Breathwork is one of the most powerful tools available for this. By extending the exhale and slowing your breathing, you activate the vagus nerve, a critical component of the parasympathetic system which signals safety to the brain and body. A few rounds of controlled, slow breathing can move you from a reactive state into a receptive one, opening the door to more aligned behavior. Physical movement also plays a key role in regulating state. If you are stuck in a freeze state, feeling immobilized, emotionally numb, or dissociated, introducing rhythmic movement such as walking, stretching, or gentle exercise can re-engage the nervous system and bring you back into a window of presence. Movement helps metabolize excess stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, which can otherwise hijack your behavior. It also provides sensory feedback to the brain that you're in control, which enhances your ability to engage with your environment consciously. Temperature and visual input also influence state. For example, splashing cold water on your face or stepping into sunlight can shift the balance of autonomic activity. Cold exposure stimulates the vagus nerve and can quickly disrupt a cycle of anxiety. Sunlight exposure, especially in the early part of the day, stabilizes your circadian rhythm and supports balanced cortisol production. These are not hacks. They are physiological shifts that create the conditions necessary for better behavior. By deliberately managing the signals coming into your system, you're setting the stage for the kind of mental and emotional clarity that supports change. Nutrition and hydration have a direct effect on state as well. Blood sugar crashes, dehydration, and micronutrient deficiencies can all contribute to dysregulation. When the body is undernourished or imbalanced, the brain interprets that as a threat and shifts into survival mode. From this place, your behavior will tend to seek immediate relief, scrolling, emotional eating, avoidance rather than long-term outcomes. Something as simple as eating a protein-rich snack, drinking water, or taking electrolytes can stabilize your state and shift your behavioral trajectory within minutes. Again, it's not about willpower, it's about working with your biology. Sleep plays a foundational role in state regulation. Without quality sleep, the nervous system operates in a heightened baseline of threat sensitivity. The prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for regulating behavior and decision-making, becomes less active when sleep deprived, while the amygdala, the fear and emotion center, becomes hyperactive. This imbalance makes it far more difficult to resist impulses or stay aligned with your goals. Optimizing sleep through consistent wake times, evening light reduction, and bedtime wind-down rituals is a powerful behavior change tool that starts at the level of state regulation. Social connection also impacts state in profound ways. Co-regulation, the process of syncing your nervous system with another person's calm presence, can reset your physiology. When you are around others who are calm, present, and grounded, your system often mirrors theirs. Conversely, being around dysregulated individuals can push your own system into a reactive mode. Choosing environments and relationships that support regulation is not just emotionally healthy, it's neurologically strategic. Visual and physiological tools shift your mindset instantly. The nervous system is tightly linked to the sensory systems, especially vision. How you use your eyes, whether you're in tunnel vision or panoramic vision, directly affects how your brain perceives stress, safety, and possibility. When you focus narrowly, like staring at a screen or phone, your brain is cued to think there is something urgent or problematic to resolve. This puts the body into a sympathetic state, ready for quick reaction but less capable of long-term planning or creativity. On the other hand, when you engage panoramic vision, that wide-angle horizons scanning mode, you signal to the brain that you're safe. This visual state is associated with increased parasympathetic tone, lower cortisol levels, and improved emotional regulation. Simply walking outside and softening your gaze to take in more of your surroundings can calm the nervous system and change how you think and feel in under a minute. The visual system also influences our perception of time and urgency. When you're stressed, your eyes tend to dart quickly, scanning for threats. This fast, erratic eye movement reinforces a feeling of time, scarcity, and danger. In contrast, slowing down eye movements and intentionally tracking stable objects, like watching a tree sway or following a smooth visual motion, sends the opposite message to the brain. It tells the nervous system, "We have time, we're okay." This shift downregulates adrenaline and cortisol, which in turn makes behaviors like patience, focus, and emotional flexibility more accessible. Learning to control your gaze, rather than letting it be driven by emotion, is one of the simplest ways to influence behavior by changing internal state. Breathing is another physiological tool with immediate effects on mindset. Shallow, fast upper chest breathing increases sympathetic activity and primes the brain for vigilance. But deliberate breathing, especially patterns that extend the exhale, activate the parasympathetic system. A well-studied technique called physiological sigh involves 2 short inhales through the nose followed by a long exhale through the mouth. This type of breathing has been shown to reduce stress markers in the body and restore clarity to the mind. It's a fast and accessible intervention for shifting out of reactive states into more reflective and choice-driven behaviors. Posture and body position also feed directly into your cognitive emotional state. When your shoulders are hunched, your chest collapsed, and your body is in a protective curl, your brain receives feedback that the environment may be unsafe. That changes not only your emotional tone, but your behavioral options. When you stand or sit upright with an open chest, you're sending different signals up through the spine and vagus nerve, signals that suggest confidence, stability, and presence. This isn't just about appearance. The proprioceptive and interoceptive systems are constantly feeding your brain information about your state. That information either constrains or expands the types of actions you feel capable of taking. The body and the brain are in constant conversation, and by adjusting the body, you change the message. Temperature is another often overlooked input that can shape mindset and behavior. Cold exposure, such as a cold shower or face dunk, activates a brief but powerful stress response that, when used intentionally, resets the nervous system. This reset increases focus, reduces inflammation, and improves resilience to future stress. It also helps clear mental fatigue and emotional stagnation, which are often barriers to behavior change. Similarly, applying heat to areas of tension can relax the body and make emotional processing easier. These somatic shifts, heat and cold, are not just physical sensations. They're tools for influencing the neurochemistry that governs motivation and action. Even sound and rhythm can be used as physiological levers. Low-frequency sounds such as drumming, slow music, or even natural rhythms like ocean waves promote coherence in brainwave patterns. This supports deeper focus, better memory, and a quieter mental environment, all of which improve behavioral control. High-frequency, erratic sounds tend to do the opposite, increasing cognitive noise and distraction. Becoming intentional about your auditory environment can reduce friction in behavior and support the brain's ability to stay with challenging tasks. Each of these tools, vision, breath, posture, temperature, and sound, are inputs that interact with the autonomic nervous system. They're levers that, when adjusted consciously, change your neurochemical state, and when your neurochemical state changes, so does your behavior. What makes these tools powerful is not just their speed, but their accessibility. You don't need willpower to use them. You need awareness, intention, and a few seconds to interrupt the loop of stress and reaction. By regularly practicing these physiological shifts, you train your body to stay in a zone where behavior is not just possible, but sustainable. Dopamine drives effort to reward the process, not just the outcome. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical, but it's more accurate to say that it's the molecule of motivation. It signals to the brain that something is worth pursuing, worth investing energy in, and worth repeating. When you understand how dopamine functions, you gain powerful leverage over your own behavior. The brain doesn't just release dopamine when you achieve a goal, it also releases it during the pursuit of a goal, if the pursuit is framed correctly. This means you can actually train your brain to enjoy effort, to crave challenge, and to stay consistent, not by pushing harder, but by rewarding the process. When you only attach dopamine release to the end result, the prize, the validation, the win, you create a fragile motivation system. If the reward is delayed, uncertain, or smaller than expected, motivation crashes and behavior stops. But if you start to associate dopamine with the act of trying, the reps at the gym, the writing session, the cold email you didn't want to send, you build a resilient system. This is how people develop what we call grit. It's not genetic or mysterious, it's neurochemical conditioning. And it begins with internal reward. Self-directed reward doesn't mean lying to yourself. It means learning how to shift your attention during an activity in a way that tells your brain, this is valuable. For example, instead of waiting until you finish a workout to feel good, you can start to anchor dopamine to the feeling of muscles engaging, to the sensation of breathing through discomfort, to the awareness that you showed up again. Each time you highlight those micro moments of effort, you give the brain a reason to release a small pulse of dopamine. Over time, this makes it easier to return to the behavior, because your brain starts anticipating those pulses during the activity itself, not after. Social and cultural rewards, likes, compliments, status, can also release dopamine, but they are extrinsic and they come with a cost. When your motivation is driven by how others perceive your outcomes, your nervous system becomes tied to external validation. This creates vulnerability to distraction, burnout, and shame. But when you learn to self-generate dopamine, to be impressed with your own process, to feel satisfaction from progress regardless of outcome, you become neurologically independent. This doesn't mean you ignore success or recognition. It means you don't depend on them to sustain your behavior. That's a much stronger position to be in. There's also a biological ceiling to how much dopamine the brain can release in a short time. If you spike it too high with intense rewards, sugar, scrolling, gambling, or even massive achievement, you often experience a crash afterward. The nervous system swings from high motivation into fatigue, disinterest, or irritability. This crash can make it hard to re-engage with the same behavior the next day. The solution is to moderate the spikes and space out the peaks. This is where process-focused reward helps again. Because it creates sustainable dopamine release over time, it prevents the kind of burnout that comes from chasing peak experiences too often. Behavioral neuroscience shows that intermittent reward, variable outcomes from consistent effort, produces some of the most powerful reinforcement. This means you don't need to win every time, succeed every time, or even feel great every time. What you need is a pattern where effort is consistently followed by a small acknowledgement, a mental note, a breath of satisfaction, a reminder that you kept a promise to yourself. These micro-rewards signal the brain to reinforce the action. They're subtle, but over time they build a deep well of intrinsic motivation. You can also pair effort with physical sensations that increase dopamine naturally. Movement, novelty, sunlight, cold exposure, and even deliberate risk can all elevate dopamine. When you stack these with behavior such as walking meetings, outdoor workouts, or setting time-limited goals, you increase the chances of the brain forming a positive association. These associations are key because the brain is always asking, was that worth it? When the answer is yes, based on both the outcome and the internal state during the action, behavior becomes self-reinforcing. Understanding dopamine doesn't mean you manipulate yourself into liking everything. It means you learn to tilt the chemistry of your brain towards sustained engagement. You teach your system that effort is not a punishment to endure, but a signal of progress. You build a feedback loop that isn't dependent on luck, recognition, or outcome. This is how you hack your behavior from the inside out. By training yourself to enjoy the pursuit, not just the finish line, you unlock the ability to keep going when others stop. Align habits with natural brain rhythms for better consistency. The human brain operates on predictable cycles that govern attention, energy, and learning capacity. These rhythms are driven by both circadian daily and ultradian shorter, hourly biological clocks, which influence everything from cognitive sharpness to emotional resilience. When we align our behaviors with these rhythms instead of fighting against them, we dramatically increase the likelihood of consistency and long-term success. Behavior change doesn't just depend on willpower, it's optimized by timing. By working with the nervous system rather than against it, we can make difficult actions feel more natural and sustainable. The circadian rhythm, anchored by light exposure and sleep-wake cycles, governs the broad structure of alertness and fatigue throughout the day. For most people, there is a natural rise in alertness in the first few hours after waking, a dip in the afternoon, and a second, smaller peak in the early evening. This pattern isn't random. It reflects the interplay of hormones like cortisol and melatonin, which influence how ready the brain is to engage in effortful tasks. Placing high cognitive load behaviors such as learning, decision making, or creative work during that morning peak can enhance performance and reduce mental resistance. When a habit is aligned with a high alertness window, it feels less effortful and more rewarding. Ultradian rhythms, roughly 90-minute cycles within the day, also impact behavioral capacity. These cycles influence focus, stress tolerance, and sensory processing. After about 90 minutes of focused effort, the brain naturally shifts into a phase where it craves rest or novelty. Ignoring this rhythm by pushing through for hours at a time leads to fatigue, reduced performance, and even negative emotional states. But if you time your behaviors into these 90-minute blocks, followed by a brief period of physical movement, nature exposure, or stillness, you reset the system. This promotes better engagement in the next cycle and helps habits stick because they don't become associated with burnout. Timing behaviors around meals, body temperature, and even ambient light also contributes to consistency. For example, physical exercise is often more effective when body temperature is higher, typically late morning to early afternoon. This doesn't just improve physical output, it also strengthens the neural pathways involved in repetition and reward. Similarly, performing behaviors in bright natural light, ideally outdoors, enhances dopamine and serotonin in release, which reinforces habit formation at the level of brain chemistry. The environment you're in is not neutral. It acts as a signal to the brain about what kind of behavior is possible or expected. Sleep plays a critical role in how habits are encoded. Deep sleep, especially early in the night, is essential for consolidating motor and procedural learning, the kind of learning required for habits like exercise, posture, or skill development. Rapid eye movement REM sleep, which is more abundant in the second half of the night, contributes to emotional regulation and cognitive flexibility, both key for maintaining behavioral consistency under stress. If sleep is erratic, the brain's ability to reinforce new behaviors and suppress old, unhelpful ones is impaired. Sleep is not just recovery. It's the scaffolding that allows behavior change to take root. Another natural rhythm that supports habit formation is the fluctuation of dopamine and norepinephrine throughout the day. These chemicals rise with novelty, challenge, and movement, and fall during monotony and passivity. This means that varying your routine slightly, such as changing the setting, adding music, or adjusting timing, can re-engage these systems and make the behavior feel fresh again. Monotony can lead to habit extinction, even if the behavior is good for you. Novelty within a routine keeps the brain invested and alert. Learning to cycle challenge and reward, intensity and rest, keeps the nervous system in a state of healthy tension, rather than fatigue or boredom. Tracking your own rhythms by journaling focus levels, energy dips, or mood fluctuations across days can help identify personal timing windows that deviate slightly from the average. Some people have cognitive peaks later in the day. Others are more emotionally resilient in the morning. Behavior science benefits from general rules, but personalization is what turns science into strategy. Aligning behavior with brain rhythms is not about rigid scheduling. It's about tuning into the cycles your body already follows. When habit timing honors those cycles, the path of least resistance opens, and what once felt like discipline starts to feel like flow. Environment and cues shape behavior more than willpower. One of the most overlooked aspects of human behavior is how deeply our surroundings influence what we do, how often we do it, and whether we stick with it long enough to see change. The nervous system is constantly scanning the environment for cues, patterns, and signals about what to expect and how to act. These cues bypass conscious thought and trigger automatic behaviors, not because we've decided to do something, but because our brain has learned to associate certain settings, objects, or sequences with specific actions. This is how habits form. It's also how we can rewire them, not by forcing change, but by modifying the cues that drive them. From a behavioral neuroscience perspective, the brain's decision-making pathways are tightly coupled to environmental context. You walk into a gym, and your body prepares for exertion. You walk into your kitchen, and your brain might activate hunger-elated circuits, even if you're not physically hungry. The presence of a phone on your desk can increase the likelihood of distraction, even if it's turned off. A cluttered room can reduce focus, while a clean and minimal space can increase the likelihood of sustained attention. These effects are not about personality. They're about how the brain processes context through sensory systems and memory circuits. One of the most powerful ways to hack behavior is to intentionally design your environment to favor the actions you want and discourage the ones you don't. If you want to read more, placing a book where you usually place your phone will increase the odds you reach for it. If you want to reduce mindless snacking, moving snacks out of sight, or better yet, not buying them, shifts the environment so the cue isn't present. This isn't about deprivation or moral judgment. It's about reducing cognitive friction. The fewer decisions your brain has to make in the moment, the more likely it is to default to behaviors supported by the environment. Habit stacking, linking a new behavior to an existing environmental cue, is another effective method. If you already have the habit of drinking coffee in the morning, you can anchor a short breathing practice or journaling session to that moment. Over time, the brain begins to expect that sequence and builds a strong association between the initial cue, coffee, and the new behavior, reflection, breathing, or intention setting. This is how rituals are born, and rituals are powerful not because they're dramatic, but because they are consistent and encoded with emotional meaning. Lighting, sound, temperature, and spatial arrangement all contribute to behavior. Cool, light, and upright posture tend to increase alertness and focus, while warm light and dim environments tend to promote relaxation and reflection. The presence of music can modulate mood and effort levels. Fast-paced rhythms can enhance exercise performance, while slower tones can deepen states of calm or creativity. These elements aren't just aesthetic, they're neural inputs. They modulate the activity of the autonomic nervous system, which in turn affects mood, attention, and motivation. Social environment also plays a critical role. Being around people who model the behavior you want to adopt, or even being in spaces where that behavior is expected, can activate mirror neurons and reward pathways in the brain. This is why support groups, co-working spaces, and even silent social accountability through shared tracking apps can improve consistency. You don't have to copy people. Your brain does it automatically when it perceives certain behaviors as normal within a given group or setting. This social mirroring effect lowers the activation energy required to act, especially when willpower is low. Importantly, environments not only shape behavior, but also emotion. A calm space can reduce baseline stress, making it easier to access higher cognitive functions like planning, emotional regulation, and creative problem solving. On the other hand, overstimulating or chaotic environments can keep the nervous system in a state of threat detection, reducing bandwidth for thoughtful behavior. When designing for behavior change, the goal isn't perfection but intentionality. A small shift in layout, visibility, or ambience can create just enough space for a different choice. That different choice, repeated often enough in a supportive environment, becomes a new behavior not through force but through design. Reduce friction and emotionally tag actions to reinforce change. In the neuroscience of habit formation, friction refers to the number of steps, decisions, or cognitive loads required to initiate a behavior. The more friction a behavior has, even if it's something beneficial, the less likely the brain is to choose it repeatedly. On the other hand, when actions are easy to start, quick to access, and emotionally rewarding, they become far more likely to stick. This has less to do with motivation, and more to do with how the brain is wired to conserve energy and avoid ambiguity. Every time you eliminate friction, you increase the probability that the behavior will occur. Every time you layer in a meaningful emotional experience, you increase the odds it will be remembered and repeated. One of the most effective ways to reduce friction is to break down a behavior into the smallest possible first step. Instead of telling yourself to go to the gym, the cue might simply be put on workout clothes. That one action acts as a neurophysiological primer. Once the clothes are on, the likelihood of the next step increases because the brain is already in motion. This is sometimes referred to as the foot in the door principle, but biologically, it relates to how the brain sequences motor plans. Once an action is initiated, the nervous system prefers to complete it. If there are too many complex or undefined steps between intention and execution, the likelihood of cognitive fatigue increases and the behavior often stalls. Another source of friction is decision fatigue. When too many choices exist, the brain delays or avoids action. This is why setting up clear rules in advance helps behaviors become automatic. I walk for 10 minutes after lunch is a more effective behavioral trigger than I'll try to exercise at some point today. The former is binary and linked to a cue, the latter is vague and requires additional decisions. Habits thrive on structure. Once the structure is established, the brain can shift into automaticity, freeing up cognitive energy for other tasks. Physical environment also introduces friction when poorly optimized. If your workout equipment is buried in a closet, you've added a layer of resistance. If your healthy food is at the back of the fridge, your brain is more likely to choose what's easy and visible. This is not laziness, it's efficiency. The brain is designed to choose the path of least resistance, especially under stress. So the goal is to make the desired behavior the most frictionless option available. That could mean prepping your environment the night before, having visual reminders, or using automation to limit the number of manual steps required. Emotion plays an equally powerful role in behavior retention. When a behavior is associated with a positive emotion, pride, relief, joy, calm, the brain tags it as worth repeating. These emotional tags activate the limbic system and dopamine pathways, essentially placing a bookmark on that experience. This is why celebrating small wins, no matter how minor, has such a strong neurological effect. The celebration releases chemicals that signal the brain, "This action matters, do it again." The opposite is also true when behaviors are attached to shame, pressure, or chronic stress. The brain may resist them even if they're beneficial. Emotional tagging isn't about being overly positive. It's about giving the brain a clear signal that the behavior aligns with internal reward. Another way to use emotional tagging is to visualize or experience the after state of a behavior, the feeling you get after a walk, a workout, or completing a creative task. If you can consistently recall and re-experience that emotional payoff, the brain begins to associate the action with a predictable reward. This creates a feedback loop. The anticipation of reward activates the dopamine system, which increases drive and energy toward the task. Over time, the behavior becomes self-reinforcing. Tracking progress, even in small visual ways, also provides emotional feedback. Seeing a streak, a journal entry, a checklist, or even a mark on a calendar provides evidence to the brain that something meaningful is happening. It externalizes internal effort, and this sense of progress becomes a motivator in itself. Without some form of tracking or reflection, the emotional value of a behavior may go unnoticed, and the brain might not prioritize it. To hack behavior at the deepest level, reduce the cost of starting and increase the emotional value of doing. When behaviors feel easy to begin and emotionally satisfying to complete, they become neurologically preferred. Over time, this preference becomes habit, and habit becomes identity, not by force, but by the consistent alignment of effort, ease, and emotion. Hacking your behavior isn't about forcing change through sheer willpower. It's about understanding how your brain and body respond to cues, environment, emotions, and effort. When you regulate your internal state, minimize friction, and create emotionally rewarding patterns, behavior change becomes not only possible but sustainable. It's not magic, it's biology used strategically, and when applied consistently, it rewires your habits from the inside out.